Hello and welcome to Williams Mullins Benefits Companion, a podcast that helps employers navigate the complex legal challenges of managing their employee benefit plans. I'm your host, Bryden DeWitt, and today I'm happy to be joined by Ken Barnes, Vice President of Investment Consulting at Sageview Advisory Group. Welcome back to the Benefits Companion, Ken.
Thanks for having me again, Bryden.
Ken is joining us today to talk about ESG investing. There's been going back to the Obama administration, there's been this ping pong ball of regarding ERISA plan investment rules with respect to ESG investing from the Obama administration to then the first Trump administration and then the Biden administration. And then here we are now with a new Trump administration and a fairly recent district court ruling in Texas that's kind of slapping down the idea of ESG investing in employee benefit plans. Ken, let's just start with the basics. What is ESG investing?
Yeah, Bryden. So just at a really high level, ESG investing goes beyond just looking at a company's kind of financial performance, and it considers its broader impact on the environment, society, and corporate governance. That's the high level definition, but I do think there's a misperception on how ESG strategies work. We've seen ESG strategies evolve significantly in recent years, and I think most people probably still think of ESG investing as kind of an exclusionary investing style where strategies look to eliminate exposure to certain industries like firearms or fossil fuels, but that's not really the case anymore. I think ESG investing really falls into three buckets. So you have impact strategies, which aim to make a positive environmental or social impact while seeking to beat a benchmark. You have ESG screens, like I mentioned earlier, which can be both positive and inclusionary in nature, or they can be negative and exclusionary, where they're eliminating certain industries, like I mentioned earlier. And then finally, we have ESG integration. And ESG integration has become much more common with many investment managers. This is really the incorporation of the environmental, the social, the governance factors into the investment strategy. Managers might just look to incorporate one factor. They may incorporate all three, but it's part of their investment process, and it's used as a way to improve their returns over the long run.
So ESG investing, or the concept of using these additional factors than just financial factors, has been around for a long time. Why do you think there's been an increase in the discussion and demand for ESG investing?
Yeah, ESG investing, I think, has been a really loud topic within the retirement and investing industry in recent years. I don't think I could go to a conference for a while without that topic being on the agenda. But the demand from our clients really didn't match all the discussion we were having as an industry. But I think that's kind of changed more recently, and we've started to see an uptick in the interest in ESG strategies from plan sponsors, and there's been more discussion. And I think a lot of that increase in demand is being driven by younger generations, millennials and Gen Z. They really want to see their values reflected in the way they invest, and they're taking those requests directly to their employers. I think another reason you've seen an increase in interest is there's really a lot more kind of product available now. Most of the larger asset managers, so think the Fidelities, the Vanguards, the BlackRocks, they've added to the number of ESG and socially responsible strategies that they offer to investors to kind of meet that demand. So I think those are the two biggest drivers, as well as the current Biden administration guidance on ESG investing. That essentially made it easier from the Trump administration.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, there's been kind of a ping pong ball going back between Democrat and Republican administrations. So what exactly was the change from the first Trump administration to the current rules that we have that were provided by the Biden administration?
Yeah, and to your point, this has seemed to flip-flop a lot in recent years. So we're constantly pivoting on how we're kind of looking at this rule. But the current rule is still the Biden administration rule, like you mentioned. Who knows, that may change in the near future. But the current rule first reinforces that the primary obligation of plan fiduciaries is to act in the best financial interests of their plan participants. But then it does state that ESG factors can be considered if they're expected to have a material impact on performance. And this was a reversal from what I'll call Trump 1.0 administration rule, which essentially said only pecuniary, and that's That's the direct word they chose. Factors could be taken into consideration, and you couldn't really give weight to ESG when looking at a plan investment. You mentioned the ruling in Texas earlier this year, but we also did see in February a federal judge actually upheld the current DOL's rule that you could include ESG factors in retirement plan investments, which rejected a challenge led by 26 different states. So Biden administration rule has really opened up the door for ESG investments to be considered more broadly in retirement plans.
So where do we stand? So we have the Biden administration regulations. We would anticipate that the Trump administration, if they get around to it, would revert back to the Trump 1.0 rules. And in the meantime, we have some court decisions. So how have those cases, the Texas case and the one you mentioned in February, how do they impact what a plan sponsor or plan fiduciary should be thinking about when they're considering ESG investing?
Yeah, so I'll take one step back, and the ruling earlier this year in January in the Spence versus American Airlines lawsuit was a really interesting decision. So back in January, District Court in Texas issued a ruling that essentially stated American Airlines breached their duty of loyalty by including funds in their 401k plan that, while they weren't directly ESG-focused investments, they were managed by an investment manager who engaged in kind of ESG-related corporate interactions, and they also occasionally supported ESG-driven proxy proposals. Now, again, the interesting thing to me is that none of the funds in the plan were actually ESG-focused investments.
That's right. And that's what American Airlines was saying, that they weren't thinking about ESG. It's just that they were using BlackRock had ESG considerations in the proxy voting.
Right. And to your point, they were broad market index funds that you find in virtually every single 401k, 403b plan. So the ruling really wasn't focused on having an ESG investment in the plan. It was more focused on BlackRock's proxy voting practices and their alleged kind of pro-ESG engagement. And so I think to answer your question earlier, I think really no matter what your opinion is on the merits of ESG investing, this ruling could really complicate the jobs for plan sponsors because it deals with a pretty universal practice of delegating proxy voting authority to an ERISA plan's investment managers. So this ruling has potentially really important ramifications for all retirement plan sponsors, not just those with an ESG investment in their plan. Just really quick on the positive side, I guess, for American Airlines, the judge did not find me a breach of the duty of prudence under ERISA. And that's because their investment monitoring and selection practices were in line with the current prevailing standards. So again, this is something I think we preach to our clients, is that process and that having regular committee meetings and making sure that you're evaluating the investments, that still remains really important in kind of defending yourselves from these sorts of lawsuits.
Yeah, it seems as though if this ruling stands, it goes even beyond ESG as to the amount of diligence a plan fiduciary would have to do with respect to the fund managers and their practices. So it wouldn't just be the fees and the investment performance, but if a plan fiduciary is going to be held responsible for things beyond its control and outside of the scope of simply whether you're making prudent investment choices, this could really, as you say, complicate things for plan fiduciaries.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's exactly what every plan sponsor we work with wants to be doing, is looking under the hood and seeing how their investment managers are voting proxies. So
yeah,
it could absolutely.
Right. So what are some of the practical takeaways from the rulings, and what should plan sponsors consider if they're looking at adding ESG investments to their retirement plan lineup?
Yeah, so I'll start with kind of some of the practical takeaways, and I'll start positive. And again, I mentioned this at the end of kind of my last comments, and that process did win out kind of in defending the claim of a breach of duty of prudence. So the committee's regular meetings, their use of an investment consultant, their investment monitoring process, those were all in line with prevailing industry standards. So process was still really important there. But on the claim that was lost, I think, again, there were no ESG investments that were provided in the plans, and there was really no claim that offering an ESG investment in the plan itself is a fiduciary breach. But the opinion specifically stated that ERISA does not permit a fiduciary to pursue a kind of non-pecuniary interest, no matter how noble the aim may be. So this is certainly, I think, going to have an impact on plan sponsors who are considering adding ESG on a go-forward basis. Another takeaway from me was, even though the court stated it's not customary to do this, plan fiduciaries may now feel obligated to monitor the proxy voting activities of the investment managers, or even have the plan retain voting rights in order to avoid conflicts of interest that came up in the American Airlines suit. But I think the second part of your question was about what should plan sponsors consider when they're adding an ESG investment to their retirement plan. And we walk our clients through a few different questions when they're considering adding an ESG investment option to their plan. And the first thing that we ask them, hey, is this just a request from a single participant, or is this something that's really going to benefit the entire population? Is this something that's coming up often, or again, is it a one-off request? And if this is really just a single participant, do they have the option within the 401k plan to invest within a self-directed brokerage account that allows them to invest in certain mutual funds or investments that are kind of non-core to the investment lineup? Or does this individual have access to kind of a brokerage account outside of the plan where they could select an ESG investment there? But another thing that we ask plan sponsors to consider is, is this kind of a snowball effect where if you add an ESG investment option, do you think this could maybe lead to potential future requests from participants for another type of investment option? I think the one that's coming up a little bit more often now is crypto. And of course, we're not comfortable adding crypto to retirement plans at this point, but that could be a consideration in terms of kind of opening up various types of investments for retirement plan participants. And then I think the last thing that we'd want plan sponsors to think about is, what are their goals with offering an ESG investment, and how are you going to implement and communicate those goals? You can really implement ESG investing in a number of different ways. I mentioned the 3 different types of investments earlier, but you can use kind of index funds. There are ESG related target date series now. And so really, what's the best way for your plan demographic to implement those ESG strategies, and how are you going to communicate it to your plan participants? But that's usually some of the framework we take our clients through as they're considering adding these strategies to their plan.
Well, Ken, thank you so much for joining us on the Benefits Companion. This has been a very interesting and timely topic.
Yeah, thanks again for having me, Braden.
So that'll wrap up our discussion. If listeners have any questions or suggestions for future episodes of this podcast, please contact me. You can also visit our employee benefits page at williamsmullen.com/employee benefits. There you can find out more about our team, as well as past episodes of this podcast and legal alerts. Finally, be sure to subscribe to this podcast to be notified when our next episode posts. Thanks for listening.
This podcast contains general, condensed summaries of actual legal matters, statutes, and opinions for informational and educational purposes only. It is not meant to be and should not be construed as legal advice. Listeners with particular needs on specific issues should retain the services of competent counsel. For more information, please visit our website at www.williamsmullen.com or contact any member of our team.